Listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar, SQL Server 2005, End of Life or New Lease of Life. I'm Rosemary Charlie, and with me today we have Ian Meade, who is Storm SQL Server expert. Ian's going to lead this morning's session, but just before I hand over to him, I'd like to just give you a brief introduction to who Storm Technology are. Storm is a business technology consultancy company that focuses on Microsoft technologies. So we help your Microsoft technologies work within your organizations, anything from CRM through to SharePoint through to Azure applications. We do business with Irish clients in multiple different sectors. So the type of clients that we work with are people such as Keller, CIE, the Kerry Group, AIB and Topaz. We've been specialising in this field for the last 20 years. So we've built up a lot of experience when it comes to Microsoft technologies, and we have a great staff base of over 100 people who all have various levels of expertise, from deep technology experts through to business analysts and strategic consultants. We've also been lucky enough to be recognised by other people for the work that we do. So this year we were recognised by the Irish Sales Institute for our CRM projects at Topaz and won the Sales Productivity Award for Ireland. We're also recognised by Microsoft this year by being their Enterprise Cloud Platform Partner for the Year. And we've also been recognised by the Irish Software Association for work that we have done in terms of digital technology services. So thanks a million for joining us this morning. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Ian, who's going to take us through this morning's webinar.
Hello, everybody. What we're going to talk about today is what the end of life for 2005 means, what is affected, and how you can migrate to a new solution, and how Storm can help you. So we'll start off with, what does it mean? It means, well, 2005 exits extended support in April 2016, which is only a few months away. And that will mean that obviously any existing software that you have will continue to run and function, no problem there. But you'll get no assistive support from Microsoft, you get no security fixes from Microsoft. And what you might find, you've got potential issues if you need to rebuild an environment, if something happens and it goes down. You may find in your organization you've got compliance issues because you need to go up into our supported version. And what you'll find is over time, you'll get more and more difficult to actually do a potential migration. Okay, so what is actually infected? Obviously, SQL Server is a relational engine. That's the standard normal SQL database that everybody knows. All your applications will run on it, CRM, your line of business, your accounting applications, manufacturing account applications, all of them. You've also got the other tools within the SQL Server toolset. You've got reporting services, which is also very commonly used. Integration services, SSIS, which is ETL2. And the SSIS in 2005 was the first version of SSIS in SQL Server. Replaced the DTS, which is an older version, which was used in 2000. You also got analysis services, which you would have the least commonly used, I would say, of the major tools in SQL Server, and that does cubes, data mining, and that type of stuff. So you may or not be using that, but obviously SQL Server Relation Engine is the biggest one, but there are other tools in the SQL Server set that are also going end of life. And what you also find is that all your applications that rely on SQL Server will also be affected. And what we'll do is we'll look a little bit more what the unexpected impact could be. Okay, one of the things is obviously SQL Server is part of a larger application landscape. So if the infrastructure it runs on and the OSs it runs on are also affected, a lot of the SQL Server 2005 would have been installed on Windows 2003, and that already exited support. And you see, SQL 2005 doesn't run on the newer versions of Windows 2012 or Windows 8. And your older physical servers, VMs these days are much more common than they were around the time scale 2005 was coming on. So you find a lot of 2005 based systems be running on single CPU physical servers or small physical servers. As the physical server gets towards its end of life, it may break unexpectedly, and you may find it's difficult to replace or bring up to date. Again, sticking with the physical servers, they're more expensive to run and to operate than the newer versions. So there's an awful lot of reasons why you consider 2005, as well as just the database itself. Another thing to consider is third-party vendor applications. A lot of them will restrict the option you can go to. They'll have a version of SQL they support. You won't be supported by them if you go to a version that isn't supported. And sometimes they have a migration strategy. One of the clients I was working with a few years ago, around the time frame of the migration from 2000 to 2005, got into quite a big problem because that vendor application had a migration strategy, and you could go with different versions, but because the client I was working for didn't migrate them over a number of versions, there was no supported migration route, and it became quite expensive to do a migration from the older versions to the newer versions. So it's something to consider as well. How does your vendor consider its compliance issues and what versions of SQL Server it'll support, and do they give you free upgrades or do they charge for upgrades? Okay, so another question. After you know those facts, did you actually care if SQL Server 2005 is going out of support? Well, the question is it necessary to run your business? And what will be the impact if it's not available? And we say not available, is it down for a few days while the emergency migration is performed, a new server is built? Or in the worst case, if it's an old physical server and you haven't got a viable backup, you've got no proper migration strategy. Um, or are you already planning to replace your application anyway? Um, if you're doing major upgrades to an application, sometimes it's worth fitting in the migration of the platform as well. You might want new features from new stuff. Can you actually save money by going to a new version? And particularly the move from physical to virtual machine has a very big potential impact on that. And you can save quite a lot of money by moving from a lot of older physical machines to newer virtual machines. And do you need the capabilities of a newer platform? And the newer versions, 2012, 2014, they have better performance, much better scalability, better security, and lots of new features. So if you're looking at like for like from 2005, application still works the same, looks exactly the same in another version of SQL. Sometimes you're missing a few tricks potentially you could get from the new versions. Okay, so assuming you want to migrate, what can you migrate to? There's a couple of edge cases we'll mention first. 2016. 2016 is still a very new version. It's only really out. So what I would suggest is wait a little bit before you move to 2016 at the moment, unless there's a feature you really, really need. You can move to 2008 or 2008 R2, and quite close to 2005, still a very widely used database, still in an awful lot of places. Already out of mainstream support, but an extended support to 2016, so you do get a few extra years. I think it's good as a short-term option. If you got a lot of 2008 already on site, a few 2005s, it's worth bringing up to 2008 onto 2005 onto 2008 and doing a more managed migration for 2008 as one go. If you find that there's something that you really want in 2016, it might be worth moving to 2008 for the short term and then moving to 2016 in the longer term. You're more likely to look at the more common options would be 2012 or 2014, or consider moving stuff into Azure. Okay, so we'll have a look at 2012 and 2014 first. What you find is they're both actually very good options. There's not a huge amount to choose between them for our purposes today. 2012 has mainstream support up to 2017. 2014 mainstream support up to 2019, which is a bit longer. You get extended support again for a good few years. So from a support point of view, you've got a lot of support windows in both of those. There's a lot of improvements in both 2012, 2014. Lots of stuff on high ability, performance, security. Way too many to mention really. But a couple of them I'll pick out. On the high availability, in the past, you've had complex options of going to clustering, or mirroring, which is okay but isn't quite as good as clustering. You got availability groups, which came out in 2012, which is a very good option. It's a good bit cheaper than going fully to mirroring, fully to failover clustering, but gives you a good level of high availability. You got a lot of extra performance if you want to reach in your databases and build stuff. Have a lot of extra capability, a lot of better cloud interoperability. So you have a lot of stuff on premise and some of your stuff in Azure. So it's a very good option. What you do need to consider if you're going for 2012 or 2014 is there's a newer license model. That means in the older versions of SQL, Microsoft used to license by CPU. You count the number of CPUs in a machine, you pay a charge for that. And the new version, what they do is they count the number of cores. And on more modern hardware, you got multi-core processor. Most processors are four at least, sometimes an awful lot more. So you need to consider the implications of what hardware you're running on it. The good news is it can actually be much cheaper if you design your hardware properly. And you can also have the option of licensing a big physical server and have a lot of VMs on it. So you can save a lot of money if you do your licensing properly and you consider how you're going to use your SQL. But because the licensing option is different, it does need to be thought about a little bit. So which option would you prefer from these two? Personally, I would probably go 2014 if it's possible. Um, 2012 is also a good option. It's very good if you already have a lot of 2012 on site. You want to standardize 2012, or your IT department has approved 2012 but not yet 2014. One of the clients I'm working with a lot at the moment, a lot of the stuff is still on 2008 R2, and we're talking about potentially building a new server for one of our applications, and we're not sure that, can we get 2012 certified and get it into production. So it's a lot down to compliance. Another thing is also going back to the third-party vendor support. A lot of them will only support 2012. If a vendor needs to support an application, they need to do a lot of testing and verifying to stand over it, and that takes a lot of time. So they may not have got around 2014. In some cases, they might say they're going to support 2012. They're not going to bother with 2016 and go 2014 and go straight to 2016. So it's an option you can think about. There's also you could have a risk and take an application, even though it's not officially supported by the vendor, run it in a version that isn't supported. And again, sometimes that gives you absolutely no problems. Sometimes it does give you a problem. Sometimes, even though it doesn't give you a problem, if the vendor finds out about an unrelated issue, they're entitled to refuse to support it. So you have a few options there for the on-premise. You also have the option of going to Azure, and Azure is the cloud offering which is becoming more and more prevalent recently. Cloud offerings means that everything is run in the cloud rather than a physical database. What you have found in the relatively recent past, a lot of organizations just ban anything on the cloud as almost as a knee-jerk reaction, force of habit, but the cloud is getting more and more accepted. So if you want to go to a cloud for SQL Server, you got two major options. You can have SQL Server in Azure, which is a software as a service offering, platform as a service offering by Microsoft, or you can have an Azure-based VM and build SQL Server in that, very much the same as you would on an on-premise. So from the Azure SQL database, it replaces the relational database engine component only. The other components we talked about, like reporting services and SSIS, they aren't included in that. There's another suite of offerings on Microsoft. So Power BI might replace a lot of your reporting or ETL requirements if you examine what your requirements are. If you want to build a SQL Server in an Azure VM machine, it's essentially the same as a VM on premise. It's just managed the VM and the physical hardware is managed by Microsoft for you. And you build whatever you want into that. And you got the full feature set if you want. In the Azure, there's a restrictions on the exact feature set. It's designed to cover as many of the possible options as you can. So it's actually quite a good option. Covers most of what you need, but you need to work out exactly what you want from there. So Azure, they're good options. They're particularly good options if you have an older life, an end of life application that was replaced with a newer version, maybe an old CRM system, and you want to retain the original database from that system and get very occasional use for it. The Azure SQL database can be a very good option for that. It's there, it's available, you're not paying an awful lot for the usage, it's safe, and you can get to it if you need it. It's also good if you've got relatively small amount of volume of information coming up and going down. One of the big problems, the only really major showstopper of putting something in the cloud is if there's an awful lot of data coming up and down, it can be a problem. So a little bit of planning about how big your application is, but Azure is increasingly a good option, a very solid option. And I would have to say a lot of people who have rejected Azure without even looking at it in the past should give it a proper look at the moment. Okay, so next what we're going to do is, once we decided we're going to do a migration, what we're doing is how we're going to do the migration. There's a few options. You can do a very unstructured migration or a structured migration. Unstructured, you do a very simple backup and restore. You don't do any major testing or preparation. Obviously, it's very low cost, but there is a risk there. I would say it can be successful, and because SQL Server is such a standards-based product, and Microsoft put so much effort into making sure everything is backwardly compatible, more often than not, it'll be successful, and you won't need to do any actual changes. So if you want low cost and prepared to accept the risk, it's a good option. But you do need to accept that there is a degree of risk. You need to monitor it and be prepared to fix your stuff after it's gone in. And this is something that actually can fit quite well into a development cycle. If you've got an application that's running under 2005, but you continue to develop it and maintain it, you can upgrade your development database to a newer version now. And in 6 months' time or whatever, when your next release of your application comes out, you can do your migration then. And by that time, it's already been very thoroughly tested. Or what you could do if you want to go from that is go to a structured one. And a structured one would involve an awful lot of planning and testing. And testing is normally the biggest portion of the work in this type of migration. You want to make sure that your application still works. What can happen with an application for 2005 moving on to the newer version is Microsoft has released a list of deprecated features, and the deprecated features are usually features which are very rarely used, but they are. So you want to test to make sure you're not actually using one of those. If you find you're using one of those, you want to work out how to migrate it or how to replace it with a better feature. So the structured one, you have a lot of reduced risk, potentially a lot of reduced downtime. You can also maximize the benefits of migration. You can build in the new features, the new security or performance features. You can design your virtualization strategy better and get more usability and more benefit out of the cost of the expensive licenses. And you can also be sure that your new environment conforms to your enterprise compliance requirements, which can actually be very, very important. Some environments, your database runs, as long as it runs, everybody's happy. Other places, it must be certified to be correct, and there's an awful lot of potential time and effort in that. So what we'll do is we'll move to the next one and we'll have a look at what a structured migration will look at. And a structured migration is we work out what we want to migrate, and we work out what we want to migrate it to, and we work out what are the potential issues and risks there, what type of rework may need to be done, what type of testing may need to be done. And we do any required redesign and rework. And the biggest part of the work is normally testing migration. Test and test and test. What you find a lot of test cycles with this type of stuff is you got a great big list of tests, you run through them all, everything passes, but to be compliant and be sure stuff will work in production, you have to go through the process of testing them. It can also be difficult sometimes working out what needs to be tested. If an application is an old application, it might have, say, dozens of screens. You might find that all of the screens from the database point of view, the back-end point of view, they're very similar. If one works, most of them are very likely to work. So you work out how big the sample of ones you want to test is. You might find that the application is old and not well understood. You might find it even difficult to work out how many pages it has. How can you get full coverage? So the next stage is you implement the migration, and you can be the backup and restore that we talked about earlier, or the number of other more complex ways you can do the migration if you want to reduce your downtime or your actual physical time, or if you want to leverage other pieces like new infrastructure and stuff. And you still need to monitor the new production environment. Because you reduce the risks, there shouldn't be anything major if you've done your planning and your preparation correct. But there are differences in the behavior of 2005 to the newer versions. So you still need to monitor your production. So next stage we look at some of the potential issues. One of the potential issues is obviously you migrate your database using the backup and restore. You attach to it using Management Studio 2008 or 2012. Everything looks fine. You think, fine, we're happy. And then you point your application to it and the application doesn't work. So you need to be sure that your application is tested. Your application would generate a lot of code, and sometimes the code may not work against the newer versions or does something different. Or in very old ones, you might find the client library can't talk to the newer versions of SQL. Probably the biggest risk, though, is if you're moving from a database which was originally 2000 and we moved to 2005 with a badly done migration, that's probably where the biggest risk is. 2000, 2005 was quite a big jump. And what Microsoft did at the time was they listed a big list of features which would be deprecated in future versions. So they still work in 2005, but they won't work in future versions. So if you did a bad migration from 2000, or even if you designed a database from scratch in 2005 and use a lot of techniques that are from 2000 era but aren't really supported anymore, you may find there's a lot of issues there. So it's something you want to consider and think about when you're looking at your database, what compatibility model it's using. If the compatibility model is a setting on the database, and what it is it eases the migration from one database version to the next, and it pretends that some of the features to be an older version. If you find a 2005 database with a compatibility model of 2000 or even an older version, there's some potential risk that features may break when you go to a new version. So you also find the application itself may just be very old. Nobody really understands it. You may find that you can't work out what parts of it need to be tested. Sometimes even is it still actually used by the business. So there's a bit of work to be done there. And it's also, if you do a like for like migration, your application works and everything still works, you may be losing out on the opportunity to get the value from the new features and the new functionality. So it's something you need to consider there. Okay, so we'll move on and say how Storm can help. Well, Storm can help determine what databases need to be migrated and help suggest which to migrate it to. You can work at migrating your applications as well. Your applications may need to be reworked, sometimes as little as just changing the connection string so it knows to talk to a new database. That's a bit of work. You may not have the skills on site to do it. Work out what the best approach is. Apply project manager, make sure everything is properly tested. If there's new infrastructure to be built, make sure there's enough time to make sure it's built and ready and tested for your migration. Make sure migration happens as easily as possible. And we can do development and DBA resources to help you out if you need. We can also do stuff like rebuilding new servers, re-implementing stuff, and obviously monitor and resolve post-migration issues. That covers most of what we want to talk about 2005 migration. While we're here, we'll also mention some of our larger offerings. What we intend to start doing in the new year is boot camps, and they will be very focused training offerings, typically around a day. We pick a technology, we bring you from very little to knowledge or appreciation of the subject to a working level to get you up and running in a new technology area. We're also hoping to do some roadshows where we'll demonstrate our capability in the SQL area, SQL end of life, and other areas around the analytics space. Okay,
Ian, that was fantastic. Really do appreciate you taking the time out to do this webinar. Guys, Ian's contact details are here in this last slide. Just to let you know that he is the man to contact if you have any needs in regards to SQL. But also Microsoft are funding a 1 to 2 day discovery workshop in and around this area. So if that's something that your organisation would like to be considered for, again, just drop Ian or either myself at rturley at storm.ie an email, and we'll certainly start that process. We really appreciate your time. Apologies, there was a slight glitch in the slides at the start of the webinar, so we will actually send you a copy of those so as you have those for your records. I think all that's left to say is thank you for joining us, and we hope you all have a very happy Christmas. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, guys. Goodbye.